Hi, and welcome to another episode of Smeco Connects. I am Tom Dennison. I am filling in for our fearless leader, Sonja Cox, who's unable to be here today. But it is my pleasure to welcome two of our most important employees we have here at Smeco, and somewhat an unheralded position at Smeco. We have two of our vegetation management people. These are the individuals who play a huge role in maintaining the reliability of our electric system, and it's a group who I tend to lean on a lot of times, and I know we get a lot of questions about from the public, and we thought it was a great opportunity to bring you guys here today to kind of talk about what you do and how you do it. So Kolby, if you could introduce yourself and how long you've been with the co-op and, what you like about working here.
Yeah, well, thank you. Kolby Corrigan, vegetation maintenance supervisor with Smeco. I've been here a little over 7 years. And before this, I did residential tree work and tree care, things like that. And, have seen the utility from the outside, the utility industry, and very happy to be a part of it. I don't have any experience with IOUs or anything like that, but born and raised in the county and like the co-op way.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Were you born and raised here, St. Mary's County,
St.
right?
Mary's, yes, sir.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being here. Scott, how about you?
My name's Scott Bacon. I'm the vegetation maintenance manager. I have been here for 20 years. Feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. Moved here from Blacksburg in 2007. And similar to Kolby, after school, I did residential tree care for a handful of years before I came to Smeco. And blessed to be here. Like I said, it's like he said, the cooperative way is a good one. It's a very tight-knit and community-focused organization, and it's been a good run.
Yeah, Scott, I remember you and I started very similar. I started in November of 2006. When did you start?
June of 2007.
2007, yeah. So I can remember overlapping a little bit maybe in some of our orientation or whatever back in the day. So it's great to have you both here. And I think it's important for our viewers, those of us who may be listening to the podcast, to understand that, Smeco is a very rural service territory. We have a large number of customer members, over 180,000. But it's important for people to understand that, our service territory is rural, meaning we have over 3,000 miles of overhead lines that we maintain. So one of the biggest drivers of outages is trees falling on lines. So either one of you, maybe Scott, can you just kind of walk us through a little bit what our vegetation management plan consists of, kind of how it's governed, and how you all implement it?
So we operate on a 4-year cycle. We have for over 30 years, since before I was here, whereby we work substation to substation and, do all associated lines from that station. We work in the 3 counties we consider Charles and PG one territory, and we kind of work in a, cyclical fashion. Our plan is governed. We have guardrails set by the different state and federal agencies that oversee our practices, which include NERC for our transmission lines, the Public Service Commission, Department of Natural Resources, State Highway.
Our local governments?
Certain municipalities, like the town of Leonardtown, has, different protocol for when we're working in there. And so that's the 4-year, that's the meat and potatoes of how we keep up with our system. We also have a very healthy service call component so that customers or internally, things that are needed in the interim between our routine maintenance can be addressed.
Yeah, and I think, Kolby, you can maybe answer this. When it comes to our service on our rights of way. I mean, a lot of times you all get calls from either members of the staff here at Smeco. I know I've called numerous times, but members of the public can call us and say, "Hey, I've got a line right near my house or in front of my house, and there's a tree that may have been impacted by a recent storm, or it's getting a little bit overgrown," and then they can kind of give us a call. Those calls get routed to you all, and then you go out and take a look. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. Most cases, a call comes in through the contact center from one of our members, like you said, with some concerns about a tree. Depending on what the makeup of that call is, it can be dispatched directly to one of our contractor tree crews for them to come out and address. If it's something that maybe they're unsure about, or if it seems like it's going to be a little bit more detailed, it gets forwarded to Scott and I. We go out and we meet with the member, discuss the situation and come up with something that's going to work out for everybody. Excellent.
And Scott, we use primarily contractors to do our right-of-way maintenance. Is that correct?
That's correct. We, some of our Smeco line crews, if they're facing a tree-related outage, they can and do handle a lot, a fair amount of that. But in terms of the management and some of the vast majority of it is done by our contract tree crews.
Right, and those are Penline?
Penline is our primary contractor. They've been with us for over 30 years. We have a fantastic working relationship with them. Asplund is our transmission contractor. They have been with us since about 2020, and it's good that we have good people.
Yeah, no, it's such an important role that they play, and I think it's and they're very visible. They're very visible to the public, and I think I know, put them through a lot of education in terms of working with our membership, and based on my experience, it's always been a pretty positive relationship between them and members of the public when it comes to right-of-way maintenance. Is that accurate?
Since they've been here for so long, they know our expectations.
Yes.
They know our customer base to where they know, where some of our more sensitive customers are. And, I've just happened last week. They have their annual Day of Safety, and Smeco provided a crew to do the Hotline demo.
Okay.
They, in turn, have done chainsaw training for our guys, and so there's a really good, coordination between us.
The contractors and the Smeco folks.
Correct.
Yeah. So let's get into a little bit of the regulatory aspects of right-of-way maintenance and vegetation. It was probably hard to imagine when you all started in this field that you would have so much of a regulatory oversight. And I know from my perspective, we have very stringent reliability standards that are put in place by the Maryland Public Service Commission. So when we have a certain feeder line, those are the lines that come from the substation to the other substations and feed all the homes and businesses around our service territory. If we have frequent outages on those, all of that information is reported to the commission. So if we have a situation where we have frequent tree outages or frequent outages caused by trees, that all falls on you all. And so what happens when that goes on, and what do you all do to prevent that from happening?
So when I first started, our department, which has since moved to engineering and operations, but when I first started, we were in the legal and regulatory department, and I
remember that.
I didn't really understand why, but one thing to consider is that we operate under the legal easements that we hold on a property, and so we have a certain area that we have legal rights to. If you look at the tree-related outages, the vast majority of those come from off right-of-way tree issues, and so it's a delicate thing that we have to face. We have this corridor that we have the legal rights to maintain, and we also have to look at the adjacent trees to that corridor and try to find the culprits before they find the lines. But at the same time, not overstep our bounds and create legal issues therein. So we have metrics that track which feeders are performing less than ideally, and so we have a system where we go and do inspections of these feeders, try to find hazard trees and address them, and that's all done with the service crews that work separate from our routine cyclical maintenance.
Yeah, and Kolby, I think that's part of the unique nature of your all's job. You have regulatory oversight, so you're working with people like me and our legal counsel. You're also working with linemen and our engineering and operations supervisors, but you're also working with the public. So walk us through, Kolby, a day where you may be doing an inspection and you notice a tree that might be right off the right of way, because typically, our right of way boundaries are very limited, and there may be a tree that is dead or dying that is very much going to impact our lines. So what do you do in that moment?
It's a delicate balance, for sure. So, if we're doing a feeder patrol and we identify danger trees that are on the edge of the right of way, we have to try to make contact with that member. We have a release form that we try to get signed for removals. That release form is going to dictate what we're going to do as far as management of the debris. Again, like Scott said, we don't own the trees, so therefore we don't own the wood or the debris. A lot of customers in our area, burn firewood and things. They want the wood, so we'll communicate with them and come up with a plan to whether we're going to cut that up into a certain size or something like that. We do not haul the wood, but we work with the member. Whether we're going to chip up the smaller limbs or things like that, whether we chip that on site or haul it off and document it and then dispatch it out to one of our contractor crews.
Yeah, and it is a delicate balance, because I'm sure you run into a lot of folks who may not want the tree to be cut. But I'm sure you've also probably had situations where trees have been cut and members of the public have been upset. You hope that doesn't happen all the time, Scott, but it is part of the job, right?
Communication is a, very important part of our process. And so we provide notification primarily via door hangers in advance of our crews with a phone that says, generally speaking, we're in the area doing work. Here's a phone number to call if you have any questions or concerns, so they can contact us and we can have that conversation before the work is done. Yes, we face we face our fair share of folks who are not thrilled about some of the practices that we take. I always, there's a reliability issue there. There's also a public safety issue that we have to be mindful of. I tell a story of a gentleman who he's since passed on, but he drove a dump truck with his feet because when he was a boy, and this was a long, long time ago, but he was climbing in a tree that had energized power lines, and he got electrocuted and blew his arms off. So there's
my goodness,
deadly serious,
reality.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we try. Communication really helps and has really helps with reducing the number of complaints that we receive, because I can say for myself, if somebody was coming on my property to do X, Y, or Z, I'd want to know that you're coming.
Sure.
Don't just show up. Nobody likes surprises.
Right.
So that's a big part of it, is just communicating, letting folks know that we're coming.
And I mean, it's a commitment that we have, and I'm not going to say we're perfect, but I know we take a lot of pride in the reliability that we provide. And I will stack our reliability metrics up with any utility in the state. And a lot of that is because of the work that you all do. And it's a major kind of feather in our cap. And so knowing that, Scott, I mean, you've been here a little longer than Kolby has. So what have you noticed in the when it comes to members of the public, or kind of the evolution of what your job has done from when you started back in '07 until today? Are people more accepting of the maintenance that we have to do, or has it been more of a pushback?
So I think the communication has improved over that time. I think that our contractors, a lot of our folks, a lot of the folks that are working are foremen and have been here for a number of years, and so that there's no substitute for experience. I think that has helped. I think everybody is so plugged in anymore that the loss of electricity is
people can't tolerate it.
The tolerance for it is very low anymore. There's so many folks working from home, and so the lights go out, and it's impacting them on a different level than maybe it was before. I think generally our customer base is pretty understanding and accepting of the work that we do. There's sensitive folks and certain areas that are a little more, we have to be a little more cautious with, but we have working relationships, work groups with some of the other neighboring utilities, foresters, and we meet quarterly and talk about stuff. And they have headaches to deal with up there on a level that's we don't face quite as much down here. So
right,
that's a blessing.
Yeah, it's great. And Kolby, one of the programs that I think that we try to push out from the communication side is the Right Tree, Right Place program. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the importance of that is for our lines?
Yeah. So Right Tree, Right Place. It's pretty simple. Basically, whenever somebody's going to go plant a tree, we want to make sure that they look up first, identify where any overhead utilities, power lines in particular, might be. Also, keep in mind the size or the species of the plant that they're going to be planting, the tree, how big that it's going to be at mature, when it gets mature. So, we don't want to plant an oak tree right underneath the lines. We want something maybe like a dogwood or something that's not going to get as big. Those oak trees are great, but we want those ideally way outside the right of way, far enough that it's not going to impact the lines in the future. So, just something to keep in mind. Homeowners, are definitely part of it, and then not contractors, but like landscape architects and things like that, trying to educate them about it. That's a big battle. So a lot. No,
it's a huge deal because I think people like to have vegetation at the front of their property, and a lot of times that's right where our lines are. So it's important for people to kind of understand that balance that we have and that we're willing to work with them, if they do plant something that is near the lines, that there are species of trees that coexist, whether it's a dogwood or certain other, trees that don't get that tall. So that's a good thing. I think the lasting message that I wanted to portray in this podcast was the delicate balance that you all have with literally every component of our company. I mean, there's a financial component about the contractors you use, the public component, the regulatory component, and the reliability component. And it really puts you all in a very certain special category in my point, in my view. And I know Sonja would say the same thing, that if there's a high-profile job going on, and something goes wrong, we're going to hear about it, obviously, and we don't hear about it very often because you all are doing the work ahead of time.
Thank you. And I was just going to say that, our goal, no news is good news for us. And so if we can operate anonymously, that's usually a good thing. This podcast does not help in that. No. But our goal, if we're doing, it's kind of like an offensive lineman. If you're doing your job, you don't really hear anything about them. And our goal is to keep the lights on and
Keep doing a good job.
Keep everything quiet. Yep.
No, well, we appreciate what you do, and I think it's important to note when we have a major storm, the amount of preparation work that you all do and bringing in additional resources just to make sure that we can oftentimes clear the path for our linemen to come in there and put up new lines and put up new conductor to get the lights back on. You guys are a very important. You guys and your crews are a very important part of that restoration process. So, thank you again for what you do. Thanks for coming on the podcast, and look forward to the next one. And stay safe. Stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.